Hey there, and welcome to a world where the sun isn't just your alarm clock. It's your relentless, uninvited personal trainer. Tonight, we're stepping straight into the battered sandals of an ordinary ancient Greek citizen, navigating a day where the reality is far less glamorous than marble statues and mythic philosophers would have you believe. By the end, you'll discover a part of Greek daily life that might just make you grateful for your questionable Wi-Fi and suspiciously scented body wash. If this kind of wild historical adventure is your thing, go ahead and hit like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these time-traveling, sweat-soaked stories. And before we set off, drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is. There's something magical about people from every corner of the planet gathering for a bedtime journey through history. So, dim those lights, sprawl out on your couch or bed, and prepare to be transported, because you're about to find out just how unready you are for ancient Greece. Let's rip away the Instagram filter. You don't wake up to birdsong and the gentle glow of dawn. Instead, you're jolted from sleep by the heat suffocating your mud brick home, which has all the insulation of a pizza oven. Your house is a boxy little structure, cobbled together from sun-baked clay or rough stone, with nothing but wooden shutters to keep out nosy goats, and, if you're lucky, a whisper of a breeze. Glass windows, you wish. Central air? That's a punchline. The only personal space you get is the exact spot the family goat isn't occupying this morning. You rise before the day's even started, not because you're a disciplined early bird, but because the sun is already slow roasting your bones. In summer, that tiny home holds on to heat like it's storing up for winter. And in winter, the same walls become a stone-cold refrigerator. Most nights, you sleep on a lumpy straw mattress or a threadbare mat, with no pillow unless you count your own arm or a rolled-up cloak. If you made it through the night without a lice attack, consider it a small miracle. But honestly, you're probably scratching already. Forget running water. Your morning routine is less about self-care and more about survival. To get any water, you haul yourself to the local public fountain, or if you're in the countryside, to a well that's never as close as it needs to be. You balance heavy clay jars on your shoulders, praying each step doesn't end in a week's worth of back pain and a shattered jar. It's a workout, but with zero fitness influences in sight. Just your neighbor's donkey giving you the side-eye. Bathing is not a morning event. If you're feeling ambitious, you'll splash your face, maybe rub a little olive oil on your skin, then scrape it off with a curved metal blade called a strigil. Imagine a spa day stripped of the spa, the day, and any trace of luxury. Privacy, not a chance. Your entire family is crammed into a single room, sleeping, eating, and arguing about who tracked in the most mud from outside. The street doubles as your hallway, your newsfeed, and the place where everyone dumps their trash. And you haven't even had breakfast yet. Your back hurts, your skin is sticky, and your tunic is clinging to you in places you didn't know could sweat. Welcome to the best part of your day. Breakfast in ancient Greece is less a meal and more a test of willpower and jaw strength. You break your fast with a chunk of barley bread called mazar, a culinary marvel, as dense and dry as a sun-baked brick. It's made from ground barley mixed with water, pressed into flat cakes and baked on hot stones or in the ashes of yesterday's fire. Picture a granola bar that's gone through a medieval punishment. If you're lucky, you dunk it in watered-down wine because, plot twist, the water is often sketchy at best. No filtration, no aquifer, and definitely no Brita pitchers hiding in your kitchen. If you're wealthy, maybe you're blessed with a fig, an olive, or the rare dab of goat cheese. But let's be real, you're not living the high life. Your bread is likely crawling with yesterday's flies and threatening to crack a tooth with every bite. No coffee, no eggs, no glistening fruit bowl, and honey is a luxury reserved for the sweet-talking or the well-connected. Breakfast is a solo mission, and women and children usually eat after the men finish, savoring the leftovers. So, not only is the food bleak, but if you're a woman, you also get to wait your turn for disappointment. It's a cruel irony that the same Greeks who gave us wine-soaked banquets and poetic odes to feasting could barely muster a line of verse for breakfast. The morning meal is quick, eaten sitting on the floor, no chairs, no forks, and zero mindfulness. You chew, you swallow, you move on. It's utilitarian, burnt at the edges, and yet you force it down because it's the only fuel standing between you and a day of hard labor, relentless sun, and more than a few run-ins with self-important philosophers. Bon appetit, ancient style. Try not to chip a molar. Next comes freshening up, which in ancient Greece means anything but. Hygiene here is a blend of ritual and bravado, not actual cleanliness. Soap is an invention from the far future, so you reach for olive oil instead. That's right, oil. You slather it onto your skin, not to moisturize, but to collect dirt and sweat. Then you scrape it off with that trusty strigil. Imagine covering yourself in salad dressing and then shaving it away, surrounded by your neighbors, all equally greasy and equally unbothered by the spectacle. Most people bathe at public fountains or in crowded courtyards, unless you happen to live near a rare bathhouse, which is as likely as finding Wi-Fi in a cave. There's no shampoo, no fragrant body wash, and the only sponge you'll see is if you borrow it from a diver who's having a bad day. Hygiene is communal, loud, and never private. If you think this sounds like a scene from a luxury spa, just remember, everyone smells like a mix of oil, sweat, and whatever the street coughed up that day. Dental care is a gamble. Toothbrushes and toothpaste don't exist, so you might rub your gums with charcoal, rinse with vinegar if you're feeling fancy, or just chew on a twig and hope for divine intervention. Bad breath and aching teeth are the norm. Deodorant is nothing more than wishful thinking, but perfumes exist for the few who can afford them. Maybe a drop of myrrh or rose oil dabbed on before you trek 5 miles through the Athenian dust. The result? A signature scent that's equal parts musk, dust, and sheer desperation. Laundry is a rare treat. Clothes are beaten against river stones, and if your budget is tight, your tunic probably hasn't met water since the last festival. The oil and scrape method might help, but when you're sweating under a relentless Mediterranean sun, it's a losing battle. In short, ancient Greek hygiene is less about feeling clean and more about appearing marginally less offensive than yesterday. And so, you grit your teeth, scrape your skin, and pray the wind's in your favor. Now it's time to get dressed. A process that's equal parts comedy and tragedy. Your wardrobe consists of 2 basic options, the chiton and the himation. Both are essentially oversized rectangles of linen, wrapped, pinned, and belted in a style that can only be described as laundry day chic. Tailoring is non-existent, and the fit is so loose that even a gentle breeze threatens to turn your philosophical musings into a full-on wardrobe malfunction. Underwear, not a thing. For us, only a fantasy. Unless you're a Spartan woman, trained for battle and unbothered by the elements, you're just praying your pins and belts hold out for another day. If you're well off, maybe your tunic is dyed a soft purple or a bold saffron, but for most, it's a faded, earthy off-white or brown. Dyes are expensive, and nobody's wasting rare color on the fishnet repair guy. Footwear is another lottery. If you're fortunate, you own a battered pair of leather sandals. Otherwise, you're braving the world barefoot, navigating sun-baked stones, goat-trodden paths, and a marketplace that's basically an obstacle course of donkey deposits and squishy surprises. Every step is a reminder that ancient Greece isn't here for your comfort. Sun protection? Forget it. No hats for the stylish, unless you're a farmer or a sailor. And the concept of sunscreen is centuries away from being invented. The Mediterranean sun doesn't discriminate. It bakes everyone equally, philosopher or farmer. By midday, your shoulders are cooked, your feet are filthy, and your linen robe is clinging to you in ways that defy the laws of geometry. Public nudity isn't exactly taboo in Greek society, so it's not unusual to walk past men training at the gymnasium in the nude, or catch a glimpse of a politician whose toga is barely hanging on. Modesty is a fluid concept, and so is your outfit. The toga burrito look is in, and everyone is silently praying for a windless day. So here you are, freshly scraped, somewhat dressed, and already exhausted. The sun is high, your chores are piling up, and your day has only just begun. This is the real ancient Greece, not the marble fantasy, but the sweat, the grime, the daily grind. And just wait, because before the sun sets, you'll see something about ancient Greek society that will change the way you think about freedom, fairness, and who really gets to call the shots. Ready to see what happens once you step outside? Because in the next chapter, we're diving into the real machinery of ancient Greek life, where military service is mandatory, democracy isn't for everyone, and the rules are written by and for those at the top. Get ready for a crash course in social roles, political games, and who really has a say in this sun-baked world. Step right up, time traveler, and welcome to ancient Greece, a place where your future is already decided. Military service is mandatory the moment you're born, a free male citizen. No applications, no interviews, just a lifetime subscription to the army. If you're in Athens, or, heaven help you, Sparta, opting out isn't an option. That philosophical streak you think makes you special, take it to the battlefield, because even the ancient Greek equivalent of the class nerd, think Socrates, had to suit up and fight, not just argue about the meaning of courage. By your early teens, you're being drilled with wooden swords, trying to master the phalanx, that iconic shoulder-to-shoulder formation, where your fate depends on the guy next to you not dropping his shield or fainting from heat stroke. In Sparta, the party starts even earlier. Boys as young as 7 are yanked from their homes and tossed into the agogish, a system that would make modern boot camp look like summer camp. Picture endless drills, regular beatings, and the kind of starvation diet that would make even the trendiest influencer cry. Survive, and you emerge a Spartan warrior. Fail, and, well, no one's writing an epic about you. Meanwhile, up in Athens, things are a little less cutthroat, but still compulsory. You'll spend 2 years in military training as a teenager, and then you're on call for the rest of your life. Don't even think about saying, I prefer poetry. The city-state always needs more bodies for rowing triremes, guarding borders, and, of course, arguing about strategy in the assembly. Wars are as common as olive oil. Athens versus Sparta, Sparta versus everyone, Persians crashing the party, and that one neighbor who keeps stealing your goats. The only thing more reliable than war is the expectation that you'll bring your own gear. That's right. The ancient Greek army is a bring-your-own bronze affair. If you can afford it, you'll show up in a gleaming bronze helmet, breastplate, shin guards, a massive round shield, and a spear. If you're broke, you get leather and cloth, which, spoiler alert, is about as effective as wearing a toga to a knife fight. No state-issued kit, no refunds, just the hope you don't end up in the front row. The poorest citizens hustle to borrow equipment, or end up as lightly armed skirmishers, which is basically the military equivalent of being told, good luck, you'll need it. When you're not marching off to war, you're prepping for it, training constantly, cleaning your weapons, and occasionally debating strategy with the kind of passion most people reserve for soccer matches. And don't forget the naval service. Those famous triremes don't row themselves, so get ready for hours of back-breaking labor, crammed elbow to elbow with other sunburned men, all sweating and cursing the lack of paid holidays. There's no such thing as veterans' benefits here. No pensions, no medals, no therapy. You get scars, a limp, and maybe a gravestone carved by someone with questionable spelling. If you're lucky, the inscription will call you brave and virtuous, but it won't mention the lice or the blisters. Think life sounds rough for a Greek man. Hang on to your tunic, because we're about to take a hard left into the world of women, a place where rights are more of a rumor than a reality. In most Greek cities, especially Athens, the average woman had fewer privileges than a fancy vase. You couldn't vote, couldn't hold office, couldn't own land in your own name, and rarely left the house without a male escort. If you showed your face in public too often, you'd be gossiped about as a courtesan, or, even worse, mistaken for a Spartan. Your daily routine starts before sunrise. You're spinning wool, weaving cloth, grinding grain, lugging water from the well, baking bread, managing the household slaves, if your family happens to be wealthy enough to own them, and raising children. You're the silent CEO of the domestic sphere, but you get none of the status or perks. Social life, forget it. No theatre visits, no late-night philosophy debates, no gymnasium workouts. That's a men-only club, and yes, they're actually naked. You spend most of your time in the gynaikon, the women's quarters. Your view of the outside world limited to glimpses through lattice windows. Education is basic at best. If you're lucky, you might learn to read a little, but most of your training is in household management, geometry, rhetoric, and philosophy. Those are strictly for the boys. Your main job is to get married young, usually to a man old enough to have grey in his beard, in a match arranged by your father. Love is optional, dowries are mandatory, and your worth is measured by your ability to produce sons. Once you're married, your whole world shrinks to the size of your household. You're expected to be invisible, obedient, and above all, quiet. If you do have children, your value as a human is basically reduced to potential mother of future citizens. Inheritance rights are minimal, and if your husband dies, you can't just set up shop on your own. Remarriage requires permission. Your legal rights are nearly non-existent, and your options narrow faster than a Corinthian column. Now, if you're thinking, maybe I'll just move to Sparta, slow down. Spartan women are legendary for being more liberated. They get educated, exercise in public, and can even own property. But before you go shopping for a red cloak, remember, all this freedom comes with a catch. The state expects you to give birth to strong sons, lots of them, or face social shame. Your body is basically a state asset, and if you don't perform, your reputation suffers. And even here, if your husband dies, your independence is limited. The men might be off fighting, but women are still bound by rules. So the next time you hear about Athena or Artemis being worshipped as powerful goddesses, just remember that real women in ancient Greece were expected to stay home, stay silent, and stay as invisible as possible. Let's talk politics. Athens is always hailed as the birthplace of democracy. But before you start picturing an ancient version of one person, one vote, let's get something straight. You're probably not invited to the party. To participate in the Athenian assembly, you need to be a male citizen, born to 2 Athenian parents, and over 18 years old. That means women, foreign residents, slaves, and anyone underage, about 90% of the population, are out of luck. It's less democracy for all, and more exclusive club for sunburned men in sandals. If you do qualify, you're expected to be actively involved. You don't just vote, you debate laws, sit on juries, and could even be chosen by lottery to manage the state treasury or oversee a murder trial, whether or not you have any experience. There are no professional politicians. Every eligible man is part lawmaker, part judge, and part overconfident amateur. Imagine your fishmonger running military logistics, or your wildly superstitious uncle presiding over a major legal case. And if you get too powerful or start annoying too many people, ostracism is always an option. Once a year, Citizens scratch a name onto a broken piece of pottery, a shirt called an ostrakon, and vote to exile the unlucky winner for a decade. No trial, no appeal, just pack your sandals and go. Still, for all its quirks and exclusions, Athenian democracy was revolutionary for its time. It gave a voice to ordinary men, some of them anyway, and laid the blueprint for political systems centuries later. But don't get it twisted, it wasn't fair, it wasn't inclusive, and it definitely wasn't what we'd call a modern democracy. If you're a woman, a foreigner, a slave, or just a kid, your opinions are about as welcome as a rainstorm during the Panathenaic festival. And now, for the part everyone likes to skip in their marble and sandals fantasies: slavery. In ancient Greece, slavery isn't just tolerated, it's the default. Even modest households have at least one slave, not because they're rich, but because the entire economy and social structure depend on it. The idea of not owning another person is as foreign to these folks as Wi-Fi. Slaves come from everywhere: Thrace, Caria, Syria, even unlucky Greeks from the wrong city at the wrong time. Some are born into bondage, others are prisoners of war or victims of kidnapping and trade. If you're an Athenian, your slave does it all: cooking, cleaning, childcare, carrying groceries, and standing silently at dinner while your host drones on about virtue. Some slaves are trusted with business affairs, or even manage their master's finances. It's the ancient version of do everything and never complain. The irony is staggering. While their owners debate justice at the symposium, slaves are doing the actual work of keeping society running. Down in the silver mines of Larion, entire crews of slaves, including children, crawl through suffocating tunnels, breathing toxic dust and scraping out ore for the city's wealth. Most won't live long enough to see daylight again. A handful of slaves, usually those with special skills, get to teach, serve as scribes, or manage bank accounts. But don't be fooled, no matter how educated, they're still property. Owners can beat, brand, or sell them at will, and the law offers zero protection. If a slave somehow earns freedom, becoming a freedman, life isn't suddenly golden. They must remain loyal to their former master, can't become a citizen, and certainly can't vote or own land outright. Their new status is slightly less powerless. And unlike later societies, there's no abolitionist movement on the horizon. Even the philosophers, yes, including Aristotle, are busy explaining why slavery is natural and necessary. According to Aristotle, some people are born to be slaves. Enlightening, right? So while ancient Greece gifts the world philosophy, democracy, and the Olympics, all of it is built on a foundation of forced labor and silent suffering. The great thinkers and leaders who shape history do so on the backs of those who will never have a voice, never own anything, and never be remembered as more than an afterthought. That's not just a footnote in the story of Greece, it's the cornerstone. And with that, you've survived another day in one of history's most celebrated civilizations. But what happens if you catch a fever or twist an ankle? Well, buckle up, because surviving Greek daily life wasn't just about war, politics, or social climbing. Next, we'll plunge headfirst into the world of ancient medicine, the theater of the gods, wild philosophical debates, and everyone's favorite civic pastime, democracy, in all its chaotic, sunburned glory. So, you're feeling sick in ancient Greece. That's a shame, because unless you happen to be snuggled up next to Hippocrates himself, your healthcare options are about as reassuring as a horoscope written by a goat. Picture this: no hospitals, no clinics, nobody in a white coat. If you're unlucky enough to fall ill or take a tumble, you're stuck at home. Maybe your neighbor swears by a bundle of suspicious-smelling herbs. Maybe your cousin is convinced that a midnight prayer to Asclepius, the god of healing, will set things right. If you're really desperate, The local temple might let you pet a sacred snake for comfort, because when in doubt, add reptiles. That's the menu. The so-called doctors of the day are a peculiar breed, a little bit herbalist, a little bit philosopher, a little bit gambler. Their guiding belief? Your body runs on 4 mysterious substances: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If those fluids get out of whack, you get sick. Too much blood? Time for a friendly neighborhood bloodletting. Hacking cough. Clearly an excess of phlegm. Try fasting and hope you don't pass out. Feeling blue? That's black bile, obviously. The prescription: take a stroll along the beach, gaze soulfully at the horizon, maybe compose a tragic poem about your suffering. Most remedies are a grand experiment in trial, error, and, of course, garlic. Garlic for your cough. Garlic for your fever. Garlic when you stub your toe. If garlic doesn't work, you could be handed crushed poppy seeds, a bowl of boiled figs, or a compress soaked in vinegar, and whatever someone scraped off a goat that morning. Sometimes these treatments did help. More often, they just made you wish you'd never complained in the first place. And if you're really unlucky and someone suggests surgery, brace yourself. Surgery is less a medical procedure and more a terrifying game of chance. No anesthesia, no antiseptics, just iron knives, bone saws, and the power of positive thinking. Even a tiny cut could become a death sentence if it turned septic. If something needed to be amputated, your best comfort was to clench a piece of leather in your teeth and pray to every god you could remember. Childbirth is its own Olympic sport, with midwives running the show. Even on a good day, delivering a baby is dangerous. Mortality rates for women and newborns are heartbreakingly high. One difficult birth, a stuck shoulder, a breech baby, any of these could be fatal. If your family is wealthy, maybe you'll summon a traveling physician, someone who carries impressive-looking scrolls and a pouch of mysterious oils. If you're poor, you make do with whatever knowledge your neighbors have, whatever remedies you can scrape together, and a stubborn will to survive. Or you simply don't make it. On the bright side, the Greeks do believe in rest, clean air, and a diet that's not just olives and wine. That's something. Ancient Greek medicine gives us the Hippocratic Oath, but it also gives us advice like, drink boiled cabbage water and wait it out. So, if you're sick in ancient Greece, your options are herbs, hope, and hanging on for dear life. Now, let's talk about entertainment, or what passes for it in ancient Athens. Theatre isn't just a way to kill an afternoon. It's civic ritual, religious observance, and, occasionally, emotional demolition derby. Here's the good news. Theatre is free, as long as you're a male citizen. If you're a woman, a slave, or a foreigner, you can forget about catching a show. For everyone else, you'll squeeze into a massive stone amphitheatre, like the one carved into the slope below the Acropolis, pressed shoulder to shoulder with thousands of your fellow Athenians. And you're in for the long haul. The Dionysia Festival is a marathon. Performances begin at dawn and run until the stars come out. Tragedies, comedies, satyr plays, one after another. No intermissions, no snack vendors. And if you need to relieve yourself, the nearest bush on the hillside is your only friend. Arrive late or act out, and you're not politely shushed, you're fined. The plays themselves are a wild ride. Tragedies. Prepare for a gut punch. Murder, madness, war. Gods cursing families for generations because someone insulted Zeus's sandals. You're not here to laugh. You're here to sob into your tunic with everyone else. Then come the comedies. And don't expect Disney. These plays roast politicians, philosophers, rival cities, and bodily functions with a precision that would make modern late-night hosts blush. Imagine a mashup of SNL and a college roast, performed by men in towering masks, platform shoes, and costumes featuring, let's not mince words, giant fake body parts. Every actor is male, even for the women's roles. The chorus sings, dances, shouts, and comments on the action like a proto. Twitter feed, only louder and with more tunings. The audience isn't passive either. They're rowdy, opinionated, ready to boo, hiss or debate mid-performance. If a play offends you, you make it known. If it moves you, you shout, weep, and maybe have an existential crisis before lunch. At the end of the festival, a jury votes on which playwright wins. Imagine spending 3 days weeping over Orestes' tragic fate, only for a bawdy comedy starring a talking pig god to take home the prize. Welcome to the world's first talent show, but with more olives hurled. In Greek theatre, you're never just an observer. You're a participant, sometimes a critic, sometimes a projectile, thrower, always a citizen flexing your democratic muscles. Once you've survived your marathon theatre binge, you might wander into the Agora, the city's bustling open-air market, only to run headfirst into philosophy. This is not optional. In Athens, philosophy is the national pastime, and the players are legends, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. But in their own time, they're just eccentric men in cloaks, haunting street corners and pestering strangers with existential questions. Socrates, for instance, is the king of awkward conversations. You might be minding your own business, buying olives, when suddenly he's at your elbow. "Do you believe in justice?" he asks. You nod. "But what is justice?" he counters. And 3 hours later, you're questioning everything you've ever believed, desperate to flee to Sparta and take up goat herding. Socrates never writes a word. His student Plato does all the heavy lifting, preserving these relentless dialogues for future generations. Socrates himself eventually pushes one too many buttons and is executed, officially for corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods, but really for being the most annoying dinner guest in history. Philosophy in ancient Greece isn't a cozy retreat for deep thinkers. It's public, noisy, and weirdly athletic. Debates happen in the Agora, spontaneous and fierce, ending in wounded pride or existential despair. There's no microphone, just booming voices, flailing arms, and egos big enough to fill the Parthenon. Don't think you can slink by unnoticed. Philosophers love to drag innocent bystanders into their debates. If you say one thing even slightly off, you might become today's cautionary tale about living an unexamined life. Even the kids aren't safe. Aristotle, for example, tutors a moody teenager named Alexander, who later conquers half the known world. Imagine your high school civics teacher handing you a map and telling you to fix civilization. So yes, philosophy gives us logic, ethics, science, and the groundwork for political theory. But in Athens, it also means a throbbing headache, an identity crisis, and a pretty good chance of being publicly dumped on by a man in sandals. Let's say you survive all this and actually thrive in Athens. You're articulate, clever, politically engaged. People start to like you, maybe a little too much. That's your first mistake. In Athens, popularity comes with a built-in booby trap called ostracism. It's not a secret plot or an after-school special. Ostracism is written into the rules of the city, and it's as public as a parade. Once a year, the citizens gather to decide whether to hold an ostracism vote. If enough folks agree, everyone writes the name of the person they want to exile on a broken piece of pottery. If your name shows up 6,000 times or more, congratulations, you're banished for 10 years. No trial, no appeal. Just pack up your sandals, grab your olive stash, and hit the road. You don't have to be a criminal. Most people who get the boot haven't done anything wrong, except become too influential, too charming, or just too visible. Maybe you're a war hero. Maybe you have a voice that makes people swoon. Or maybe your hair is just too perfect to trust. Whatever the reason, your fellow citizens decide you're becoming a threat to democracy, and democracy's answer is to yeet you into temporary oblivion. But here's the twist. Ostracism isn't forever. After 10 years, you're allowed to come back as though nothing happened. Your property is untouched, your citizenship intact, and supposedly no hard feelings. Some of Athens' most famous citizens take their turn in exile. Aristides the Just, so universally admired that one voter admits he wrote Aristides' name down simply because he was tired of hearing about how great he was. Brutal. Themistocles, the strategic genius who saved Athens at Salamis, finds himself kicked out after getting a bit too cocky. Apparently, gratitude comes with a short shelf life. Ostracism is supposed to protect Athens from tyrants, but often it just penalizes anyone who stands out. So if you're ambitious, you have to walk a tightrope, respected, but not too much, popular, but not so popular that people get nervous. Think of it as the ancient world's answer to reality TV. Win too many fans, and the prize is a decade-long vacation you never asked for. Athens invents democracy, but it also pioneers cancel culture, 2,500 years before hashtags. And there it is, daily life in ancient Greece, in all its messy, glorious, garlic-scented reality. Whether you're trying to survive the medical lottery, sobbing in the theatre, dodging philosophers in the agora, or nervously eyeing your popularity score, you're living in a world that's half legend, half chaos, and entirely human. Don't get too comfortable though, because in ancient Greece, surviving another day doesn't mean you're safe from the next round of gods, goats, and public opinion. Speaking of which, in ancient Greece, you didn't ask if you were going to die young. The question was always when and how many gods or angry fellow citizens might be involved. But that's a story for our next chapter, when mortality, faith, and the seeds of rebellion take center stage. Your first existential crisis in ancient Greece would hit before you could even spell existential. Instead of debating whether you'd die young, you simply wondered how soon and how spectacularly unpleasant it might be. Average life expectancy, somewhere around 30 to 35 years, if you were lucky, tough, and had the immune system of a demigod. And that's only if you survived your own toddler years, which, frankly, was a coin toss. About a third of all children never made it out of childhood, courtesy of mystery fevers, dodgy food, and a level of hygiene that would make a sewer rat wince. Death was everywhere, all the time. It lurked in a scraped knee that turned septic, a random cough after a cold night, or in childbirth, a deadly lottery that claimed countless women. Sometimes it waited in a cup of water you didn't boil, because boiling water was for the rich or the paranoid. The medicine cabinet. Picture a handful of dried herbs, a suspicious paste your neighbor swore by, and a prayer or two shouted at the sky. If you caught something nasty, your best bet was to hope, squint at the sun, and maybe try a garlic poultice while you waited to see if the gods were in a good mood. And then there were the joys of city living. Tight alleys, overcrowded homes, and the ever-present aroma of open sewers doubled as a petri dish for the next epidemic. The infamous plague of Athens didn't care if you were a philosopher or a fishmonger. It cut down 1 in 3, including Thucydides, who, because he was apparently built different, survived and lived to write about it. Most people weren't so lucky. While you might dream of marble columns, remember, most Greeks spent their days dodging invisible killers and hoping the next festival didn't double as a mass funeral. And if you were a man, you could forget about retiring in peace. War was a way of life. The odds were high. You'd die with a spear in your hand or an oar strapped to your back on a trireme. If you managed to limp home, any wound could turn against you within days. No penicillin, no clean stitches, just hope, spit, and maybe some sage leaves. A stub toe could snowball into something that sent you to Hades faster than you could recite your family tree. But let's not forget divine intervention, which was less of a spiritual comfort and more like living under the rule of a cosmic reality show host with a penchant for random smiting. Forget a sacrifice. Your crops withered. Mock a statue. You might wake up to find your house flattened by lightning or your goats mysteriously rabid. Make the tiniest slip at a festival, and you could find yourself at the center of a spontaneous goat stampede, courtesy of a vengeful woodland sprite. Sometimes you never even knew what you'd done wrong. Maybe your cousin skipped a prayer. Maybe your great-grandfather ticked off Apollo. Didn't matter. The gods worked in ways that were both mysterious and deeply personal, and they had a long memory for grudges. And then there were the burial rites. If you died and your family couldn't afford the proper send-off, coins for the ferryman, the right chance, the right fire, you might just get dumped beyond the city walls, unmarked and unremembered. Not only was that a social disaster, it was a spiritual nightmare. Greeks believed an unburied soul was doomed to wander, lost between worlds, forever seeking rest. Death wasn't poetic or elegant. It was routine, indifferent, and entirely democratic. You could be a slave, a general, or even a poet like Sappho, and still wind up dead from a moldy fig or a particularly vengeful mosquito. Greek religion, in theory, sounded noble, living in harmony with the divine, offering reverence to Zeus, Hera, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Poseidon, and the rest. But in practice, it was constant spiritual damage control. These gods were not benevolent overlords. They were immortal drama queens, with the power to ruin your week with a well-timed thunderstorm or a plague of boils. Miss a festival, your ship sinks. Say the wrong prayer, your livestock drop dead. Step into the wrong grove at the wrong time, and suddenly you're wrestling with the snake or beset by famine. The gods demanded not just loyalty, but perfect rituals, flawless timing, and unwavering devotion. You didn't just visit a temple on special occasions. You had home altars, daily offerings, and rituals for everything from planting crops to cleaning your sandals. Before a journey, you'd pour wine for Poseidon, maybe even sacrifice a goat if you really wanted to play it safe. Going to war? Ares expected a cut. And if your family had ever ticked off a deity, well, tough luck. You might be cursed until further notice. The relationships with the gods were personal, but not in a cozy, I have a favorite way. Apollo might bless your city, unless he was still angry about something your grandfather did, in which case, good luck. Hera was supposedly a goddess of marriage, but if Zeus looked at you the wrong way, she specialized in making your life a living nightmare. Athena rewarded wisdom, sure, but also had a knack for turning people into spiders if they got too clever. Meanwhile, nymphs, satyrs, river gods, and woodland spirits prowled the margins of your world, each with their own rules and taboos. Step on the wrong patch of grass, and you might lose a limb to a sprite you didn't even know existed. The worst part, you never really knew why disaster struck. Was it the wrong offering? The wrong time of day? Did you insult a god in your sleep? Or maybe you just looked at the priest funny. The gods' ways were as inscrutable as they were terrifying. Yet, for all the fear, Greek religion was woven into every moment of life. Temples towered over cityscapes, festivals brought whole communities together, and myths explained everything from thunder to heartbreak. You didn't believe in the gods because you wanted to. You believed because you had to. It was less faith, more survival instinct. So, after all the sun-baked homes, barley-bread breakfasts, sandal-blistered treks, endless wars, relentless plagues, and the constant threat of supernatural inconvenience, let's answer the real question. Could you last a single day in ancient Greece? Honestly, you'd fold before noon. The heat would sap your energy, the food would baffle your stomach, and the ever-present threat of war or divine retribution would have you longing for your air-conditioned apartment and aspirin stash. Imagine starting your day hauling water from a well, squatting over a communal pit latrine next to a goat, and ending it listening to a neighbor rant about justice while brandishing a fish he plans to sell you. You might love the fantasy of reclining among marble statues, debating philosophy under the stars, or reciting poetry with Sappho on a sun-drenched island. But that was the glamorous 1%. For everyone else, it was back-breaking labor, next to no rights, and funerals that came around more often than paychecks. Democracy. Only if you were a male citizen. Medicine, hope and garlic. Divine approval? Constantly in doubt. Social media? A guy yelling in the agora about taxes while waving a mackerel. And yet, for all the hardship, the Greeks didn't just survive, they thrived. They built temples that still defy time, wrote plays we still perform, and debated ideas we're still arguing about. They took misery, chaos, and divine pettiness and spun them into civilization. You, dropped in the middle of it, would probably crumble under the first sunstroke, the first goat bite, or the first unsolicited Socratic lecture. But if you managed to adapt, just a little, just enough, you'd find yourself among some of the most stubbornly passionate, resilient, and gloriously flawed people who ever lived. And if you struggled, they wouldn't shame you. They'd throw you a tunic, point you to the amphorae, and say, "Good. Now haul that up the hill." History rarely gives you a break, and neither did the Romans. Far from the sunlit Mediterranean, in the mist-cloaked wilds of Britannia, another story was about to ignite, one of betrayal, brutality, and a queen who would not be broken. The spark was a death and a dashed hope. Prasutagus, king of the Iceni tribe, somewhere in what we now call Eastern England, had played Rome's game for years. He balanced on a knife's edge, ruling as a client king beneath the looming shadow of the empire. He had wealth, a measure of independence, and peace, so long as he stayed useful to Rome. But peace is a myth, and Rome's patience was always conditional. When Prasutagus died around 60 AD, he tried to protect his people with a final, desperate gesture. In his will, he named the Roman emperor co-heir alongside his two daughters. Surely, he hoped, this act of loyalty would safeguard his family and tribe. Rome's response? Not even a raised eyebrow. They didn't honor the will. They didn't haggle or send condolences. They marched in, seized the kingdom, and claimed everything: lands, livestock, homes, treasure. But the worst was yet to come. The Roman overlords made a public spectacle of their power. They flogged Queen Boudica in front of her people, not just to punish her, but to shatter her spirit and send a clear message: you are nothing. And for the final, soul-crushing blow, they violated her daughters before her eyes. It wasn't just a crackdown. It was psychological warfare, the kind designed to break an entire tribe's will. But instead of breaking, Boudica transformed. Rome thought it had crushed a minor tribal woman beneath its boot. What it had done was awaken a lioness. Here was a queen whose agony would soon become a legend, a mother whose rage would set cities ablaze, a woman about to remind Rome that even empires can bleed. Word of the atrocity burned through Britannia like summer lightning. The other tribes listened. They remembered their own humiliations, their stolen lands, and the brothers and sons lost to Roman campaigns. Rome had always assumed the tribes would stay, divided and scattered, too busy feuding to unite. But now, they shared one thing: Boudica's fury. What started as Rome's violation of one queen would become the rallying cry for an entire nation. By breaking their treaty, their promises, and the body of a queen, Rome shattered the illusion of their own invincibility. This wasn't just a blunder. It was the spark that would ignite one of the most vicious uprisings Rome would ever face. If Rome expected Boudica to disappear in shame, they misunderstood everything about her. She was never meant to obey. She was born to lead. Even the Roman historians, no strangers to describing their enemies as wild barbarians, painted her as tall, fierce, with a mane of flaming red hair that tumbled to her waist, and a voice that could slice through a battlefield. She became a symbol as much as a sovereign, a towering threat where before there had only been a client queen. But before Boudica became the terror of Rome, she became something deeper, a mother with nothing left to lose. The Romans tried to erase her dignity, her children's future, and her people's pride. But Boudica refused to be a victim. She understood that Rome's greatest fear wasn't a single army. It was the possibility of unity among its conquered peoples. So she began to forge that unity, one tribe at a time. She started with the Trinovantes, once powerful but now crushed under Roman taxes, land grabs, and forced labor. When Boudica spoke, she didn't use the honeyed words of a diplomat. She spoke as a warrior mother, scarred but unbroken. She reminded them of their ancestors, their buried gods, and the earth beneath their feet that now belonged to strangers. Her pain was their pain, her rage their own. Soon others began to listen, the Corieltorvi, the Cornovi, even some among the Brigantes. Her cause swelled beyond vengeance. It became a crusade, a holy mission to cleanse Britannia of Roman arrogance. She didn't promise safety. She promised glory, and, if it came to it, death with honor. And they followed her. Because Boudica didn't stand behind her warriors, she rode beside them, spear in hand, hair streaming wild, eyes locked on the horizon. She called out the names of the raped, the enslaved, and the executed. She summoned the Celtic war goddess Andraste as her witness, and her warriors believed her when she declared the gods would march with them. She had no formal training, no scrolls of Roman tactics, but she carried something deadlier, righteous fury, sharpened by betrayal and guided by purpose. Even the land seemed to stir beneath her feet. This wasn't just a rebellion, it was resurrection. The queen Rome had tried to erase was now the spearhead of a movement that would soon make the empire tremble. And Boudica was only getting started. The fire was lit. Next, the flames would spread, threatening to consume everything Rome had built in Britannia. As the Roman eagle soared over the misty land, it was about to learn just how quickly an empire could become prey. You've grown used to the Roman eagle looming over Britannia, its banners snapping in the wind, its statues glaring down with all the arrogance of an empire that thinks itself immortal. But now, something is shifting. The air tastes different. It's not the sharp tang of a sudden wildfire, but the slow, rolling thunder of a storm gathering on the horizon. And at the eye of this storm stands Boudica, not just a queen, but a living answer to generations of whispered prayers and clenched fists. When she speaks, it isn't with the polished Latin of her conquerors. Her words are forged from pain, wrath, and the stubborn hope of people who have been trampled for far too long. The rebellion doesn't start in some marble hall, but beneath the ancient boughs of sacred groves and on hills silvered by moonlight. There, you see her, barefoot in the mud, war paint streaked across her skin, hair wild as the storm she commands. No throne, no ceremony, just the raw solidarity of a people rediscovering themselves. She listens, really listens, to the trembling voices of widows, the growls of embittered chiefs, the incantations of druids who read fate in the flight of crows. Every voice tells the same story. Rome has crossed a line, and Boudica is the one willing to shove back. The army that answers her call is a tapestry of fury. The Trinovantes arrive first, bristling with spears, and the defiant rhythm of old songs that once echoed in these hills. before Rome even dreamed of conquest. The Iceni bring cavalry, riders whose horses seem as untamed as their hair, their faces smeared with blue dye, their eyes wide and unblinking. Other tribes soon follow, axes and blades raised high, torches guttering in the wind. It isn't just men sharpening weapons by firelight. Women too, inspired by Boudica's rage, wrap their hands around sword hilts and swear oaths beneath the stars. This isn't just an army, it's a resurrection. The old Celtic pride, buried under years of taxes and humiliation, is rising from the dead. But here's the catch. Rome doesn't play fair. They have legions, trained to move and kill as a single armored beast. Their formations are machines, their discipline legendary. Boudica's answer? Numbers. Knowledge of every twist in the land. And something Rome's finest instructors could never teach. The kind of hatred only forged by watching your home burned, your gods mocked, and your children's futures sold for silver. As days pass, the rebel ranks swell. Farmers toss aside plows for crude blades. Hunters, who once stalked deer through the forest, now become Roman nightmares, melting into the undergrowth, only to strike at stragglers and supply lines. Even former Roman slaves, men and women who once mopped floors in villas or were forced to kneel before their masters, now join the swelling tide. You can almost hear the collective heartbeat, pounding with the memory of stolen land, with the hunger for vengeance and the desperate desire to be free. On sun-chill morning, with mist curling around their ankles, Boudica stands before her gathered army. Her voice is not the high, brittle pitch of desperation, but a deep, steady promise. She tells them she will have victory, or she will have death. No surrender. No crawling back. The first city to feel the weight of this promise is Camulodunum, once a proud tribal capital, now a Roman colony where marble temples squat on sacred ground, and villas dot the landscape like an insult. The Temple of Claudius rises above all, a monument built with the sweat and misery of the conquered. To Rome, it's a symbol of dominion. To Boudica, it's a target painted in arrogance. Her order is simple. Erase it. The rebels descend on Camulodunum, not as an army laying siege, but as a tidal wave swallowing everything in its path. Roman settlers, many of them retired soldiers who spent years sneering at the locals, are caught completely off guard. The city is soft, trusting in its own supposed invincibility. There are no proper walls, just a handful of bored legionaries who expected nothing more dangerous than an argument over taxes. They try to make a last stand in the temple, barricading themselves behind stone columns, convinced that Roman gods and Roman engineering will save them from the wrath outside. They are wrong. Within 2 days, Boudica's forces break the temple's defenses. What happens next is not a clean, orderly battle. It is raw, personal vengeance unleashed. Streets run slick with blood. The few who try to escape are run down. The flames that consume the temple are visible for miles, the roof collapsing in a shower of sparks that blot out the stars. Statues are smashed, villas gutted, the old tribal gods invoked with every torch thrown. Survivors stagger from the ruins with stories so horrifying that even the most jaded Roman bureaucrat blanches at the retelling. This is not chaos for its own sake. The violence is targeted, deliberate. Every villa burned, every Roman symbol toppled, is a tally in a ledger of long-standing grievances. These people have lost daughters to slave markets, sons to forced conscription, sacred woods to Roman axes. Now, every blow is payback, every scream a small measure of restitution. Roman officials, those who survive, send frantic messages north and west, begging for Governor Suetonius to return. He's hundreds of miles away, chasing another uprising in the wilds of Wales. And by the time he hears the news, Camulodunum is already a smoking crater. The rebellion's signal flare has been lit, and the fire is spreading fast. There's no time for Boudica to gloat. She knows Rome will answer, and when they do, it won't be with mercy. The only chance is to keep moving, to strike again while the legions are still caught flat-footed. The next target is even bigger, richer, and more vulnerable: Londinium. Londinium is the jewel of Roman Britain, barely 2 decades old, but already bustling with traders, officials, and all the trappings of imperial wealth. Picture a city where every street is a marketplace, every roof tiled in imported clay, every home a little outpost of Rome's imagined eternity. But as whispers of rebellion reach its gates, all that wealth curdles into fear. Merchants pack their goods, Roman officials glance nervously over their shoulders, and the local Britons, those who have lived under Rome's boot, watch with a mixture of hope and terror. Governor Suetonius finally appears, battered and travel-worn, with a handful of legionaries. He surveys the sprawling city, its markets teeming, its defenses laughable. The hard truth hits him. He cannot save this place. He orders a retreat, taking with him only those who can keep up. The rest, the old, the sick, the stubborn, are abandoned to whatever fate Boudica brings. And she brings it quickly. Her army floods into Londinium like a dam breaking. There are no walls to slow them, no organized defense. The city is wide open, and the rebels don't pause to loot or plunder. This is annihilation, pure and simple. Roman families are dragged from their homes. Some are killed where they stand, others herded into temples and set alight. No quarter is given. Villas and warehouses erupt in flames, columns topple, the sky turns black with smoke. From miles away, you can see Londinium burning, a bonfire of imperial hubris. To the Romans, this is not a rebellion, it's the end of the world. Ancient sources like Tacitus and Cassius Dio, never ones to downplay drama, claim tens of thousands are killed. Some say the carnage in Londinium is even worse than what happened at Camulodunum. For survivors, the city is wiped from the map in a matter of hours. And through it all rides Boudica. She does not hide behind her warriors. She leads from the front, her daughters at her side, her chariot wheels spattered with mud and blood. For her, this is not mindless cruelty. This is justice, raw, unfiltered, and long overdue. Rome took her family, her dignity, her land. Now she takes everything Rome thought untouchable. But the fire hasn't finished spreading. There is one more Roman center in the path of Boudica's storm, Verulamium. Rich, Romanized, but just as unprotected as the others. The pattern repeats. Boudica's army sweeps through, sparing no one. Temples are razed, shrines smashed, Roman infrastructure ground into dust. The earth itself bears witness. Archaeologists today still find a blackened layer of ash beneath the modern town, a scar left by rebellion and retribution. Now, let's shift the lens for a moment. Picture the Roman Senate. News of the catastrophe arriving like a cold wind. Panic spreads among the marble pillars. Even Emperor Nero, who isn't exactly known for his nerves of steel, is rumored to consider the unthinkable, abandoning Britannia altogether. Imagine it. A Roman Empire that stretches from the burning deserts of Egypt to the frigid hills of northern Europe, now trembling at the thought of one woman in a chariot. But Boudica's power isn't just in the terror she inspires. It's what she represents. Rome sees itself as eternal, its cities as immortal, its rule as destiny. Yet here comes a queen, beaten, humiliated, left for dead, now rising from the ashes, torch in hand, rewriting the rules of empire. Every city she burns is a message. Rome can bleed. Queens can fight back. Still, with every victory, the rebels' burden grows heavier. The army swells, but the supply lines stretch thinner. Coordination falters in the wake of so much destruction. Some tribes, drunk on success, grow complacent, celebrating in the ashes, while Rome, ever resilient, regroups in the shadows. Suetonius hasn't given up. He's fallen back, yes, but not surrendered. He gathers reinforcements, hard-bitten veterans from across the province, and picks ground for a final battle. He knows that one decisive moment looms on the horizon. Yet despite Rome's legendary discipline, a shadow hangs over every soldier, every senator, every trembling merchant. Could they really stop her? Because Boudica isn't just waging war, she's shattering the myth of Roman invincibility. She's showing the world that even the greatest empire can be brought low by the fury of the conquered and the will of a mother who refuses to kneel. With every city she burns, with every Roman symbol reduced to cinders, the world holds its breath. The fire is still spreading. The final reckoning is almost here. But as the smoke clears and the embers cool, a new question rises. What happens when the storm runs out of fuel? The next chapter awaits, where we'll see how the fire, at last, meets its end, and what remains after the last stand, both in legend and in the everyday lives of those who survive, where illness, healing, and the sacred dance of medicine shape the ancient world in ways Rome never could predict. Now, the flames have met cold, unyielding iron. You find yourself standing on the edge of a narrow defile, the scent of churned earth and sweat thick in the air. Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus did not leave this moment to chance. He was no green recruit, no pampered patrician. He had survived Rome's darkest corners and bloody campaigns, and every scar told him how to stack the odds. While Boudica's warriors reveled in the ruins of Roman towns, Suetonius was plotting in the shadows, sketching out a trap. He chose the battlefield like a chess player, sacrifices a pawn, luring the Britons into a cramped strip of land hemmed in by forests and steep hills. Here, numbers meant nothing. Here, a mob became a bottleneck. Suetonius's force was pitiful by Roman standards, 10,000 men, give or take, arrayed in tight, disciplined ranks. But these were legionaries, hard as flint, each drilled until their very bones seemed to hum with the rhythm of Roman command. Across the field, the Britons gathered in a swelling, noisy tide. Some ancient sources claim 200,000 warriors had come for Rome's blood. Maybe it was less. Maybe it was more. It hardly mattered. They were not soldiers. They were farmers, clutching axes, blacksmiths wielding hammers, chieftains hungry for vengeance, and people who had lost too much to turn back. Their hearts burned hotter than the torched Roman villas behind them, but their lines wavered like smoke. They believed sheer numbers would sweep the Romans away like driftwood in a flood. They were about to discover just how wrong hope can be. The Britons surged forward, but not before Boudica made her final stand. Literally, you can almost see her, standing tall atop her war chariot, fiery hair whipped by the wind, her daughters at her side, their faces set in grim determination. A voice cut across the chaos, reminding her people of why they stood here, stained by the memory of floggings, the echo of humiliation, the devastation of their homes and families. She invoked the goddess Andraste, called upon the ancestors and all the wrongs carved deep into the land by Roman boots. She promised her warriors glory or death, nothing in between. The response was a roar that shook the hills, 1,000 voices rising in hope and fury. If faith and rage alone could win a war, Rome would have been dust before noon. But war, as you're quickly learning, does not reward passion alone. The Britons charged, a living wave of painted bodies and clashing shields, but the Roman line did not so much as flinch. Suetonius had them wait, packed tight in the narrow pass, shields interlocked, spears leveled with deadly patience. The Britons hit the Roman front like a tidal wave and broke on it. The Roman counterattack was pure choreography. Pillar soared through the air, shields shifted, short swords, gladius blades, stabbed and slashed in quick, brutal strokes. The Britons, funneled by the terrain and pressed close by their own numbers, could not maneuver. Each fresh wave only added to the chaos, bodies piling up, panic spreading. The Roman advance was slow, methodical, relentless. Step by step, shield by shield, they pushed forward, every inch of ground paid for with discipline rather than bloodlust. Behind the Briton lines, wagons and carts had rolled up with families and hopeful spectators, all eager to witness the destruction of Rome. Now, these became death traps. There was nowhere for the Britons to fall back. The trapped mob turned into a rout. Panic tore through the ranks as the reality of defeat crashed over them, more crushing than any legionary's blade. The battlefield devolved into a slaughterhouse, the screams of the dying mixing with the thunder of Roman command, the earth itself slick with the cost of rebellion. When the sun finally slipped behind the trees, what remained was only silence and the low moans of the dying. The rebellion had been snuffed out as brutally as it had begun. Tens of thousands of Britons lay dead, the uprising shattered, the survivors scattered. The Roman Empire, battered but unbroken, had held the line. Boudica had thrown everything, rage, hope, and the bodies of her people, against the world's mightiest army. And now the cold air carried only the drifting ashes of shattered dreams. And Boudica herself. She was gone. No one knows what became of her. There are no eyewitness accounts of her last moments, no epic showdown with a Roman general, no final defiant speech. The Roman historians can't seem to agree. Some say she took poison, refusing to be paraded through the streets of Rome as a trophy. Others claim she simply fell ill and died quietly. Her fire extinguished not by the Romans, but by fate. What matters is this: she vanished. No iron chains ever bound her hands in a Roman triumph. No jeering crowds ever saw her humiliated. Boudica, the storm, simply slipped back into the mists that had birthed her. But in that vanishing act, she transformed. The woman who had once been flesh and blood, queen and mother, became something far greater. She became a legend. Rome, for all its power, could not erase her. They tried to bury the memory, under piles of rubble and scrolls of propaganda. But the story was already loose in the wild, whispered around campfires, sung in the sacred groves. Among the Britons, she was not a defeated rebel. She was a martyr, a goddess of vengeance, a mother who had faced the world's greatest empire and left it bloodied. Even her enemies couldn't help but respect her. Tacitus, loyal Roman though he was, painted Boudica not as a savage, but as a formidable leader, wronged by imperial arrogance. Cassius Dio described her with awe, remembering the way her words could shake the hearts of men. The Romans feared her, yes, but they could not help but admire the woman who refused to kneel. Centuries rolled by, and Boudica's story refused to die. She rose up again and again, a chariot wheel spinning through the pages of Victorian poetry, her image cast in bronze, her name etched into the imagination of every generation that dreamed of resistance. In schools and in stories, she became a rallying cry for anyone who dared to stand up to oppression, especially for women who saw in her story a fire that no empire could snuff out. Her legend became a question asked again and again. What happens when the voiceless decide they've had enough? Step into modern London, and you'll find her still there. Her statue stands imperious near Westminster Bridge, chariot raised, daughters beside her, eyes fixed on a horizon that is always just out of reach. Tourists snap selfies, traffic whirs beneath her, and most never realize they walk through the shadow of a rebellion that almost changed everything. But Boudica's true legacy is not in cold bronze. It's in what she represents: the power of resistance, the cost of defiance, the courage to stand and demand a different world, even when the odds are impossibly long. Boudica's rebellion was never clean. It left a trail of blood that soaked the land, and her warriors, for all their heroism, committed their own atrocities. Tens of thousands died on both sides. But history isn't a morality play, and the stories that shape us are rarely tidy. What keeps Boudica's flame alive is not the perfection of her cause, but the sheer, incandescent force of her refusal to accept subjugation. She lost everything, and still she stood. She was a queen, a mother, a rebel, and in her defeat she became a symbol, an idea that could not be chained or beheaded or erased from the earth. Ask a modern Briton who Boudica was, and you won't get a recitation of footnotes. You'll get the story of a queen who made Rome bleed, a leader who united warring tribes and taught the world that dignity can rise from devastation. She is more than a historical figure. She is the whisper in every voice that says, "No more. Not today." Even as Rome rebuilt its burned-out towns and redrew its borders, Boudica remained. Her fire, once fanned by grief and rage, now burns in every fight against tyranny, every act of rebellion, every soul that would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. She is gone, but her legend rides the wind, her chariot wheels echoing through time, a symbol of the unbreakable will to be free. Now, let's pull back from the smoke and carnage and step into the quieter, stranger world of ancient beliefs about health and healing. To the ancients, illness was never just a random misfortune or an unlucky roll of the biological dice. Forget germs and DNA. Those ideas are millennia in your future. Back then, sickness was a sign, a warning that something had gone terribly wrong, not only in the body, but in the entire fabric of existence. Disease was evidence of imbalance, a crack running through the delicate harmony of body, mind, spirit, and nature. In Mesopotamia, if you fell ill, the first question wasn't, "What hurts?" but "Who did you offend?" Disease was as much about broken taboos as it was about physical symptoms. Maybe you angered a god, maybe you stepped out of line, or maybe you were cursed. Diagnosis involved more than checking your pulse. Priests and healers would interrogate your recent choices, interpret omens, cast protective spells, and only then turn to herbs or poultices. Every treatment was a negotiation with the unseen, a delicate attempt to rebalance the scales. Travel east to ancient China, and you'll find a different, but no less intricate, vision of health. Imagine your body as a battlefield, where yin and yang, fire and water, heat and cold are constantly wrestling for supremacy. The Chinese healers didn't just hand you a potion and call it a day. They wanted to know when your cough started, whether it was worse in the morning or at night, what emotions churned inside you. Illness was a disturbance of your inner cosmos, and healing meant restoring equilibrium. Acupuncture, herbal concoctions, dietary shifts, even breathing exercises, all these were weapons in the war for balance. Meanwhile, in Greece, Hippocrates, yes, that Hippocrates, decided to sidestep the gods entirely. For him, health was about harmony, but of a very literal kind. The four humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, were the ingredients of the human stew. Too much or too little of anyone, and you'd end up not only sick, but with a personality to match. Feeling gloomy must be an excess of black bile. A bit too fiery. Yellow bile is your culprit. For centuries, Western medicine would chase these humours, diagnosing and treating the invisible tides within every patient. Across every culture and continent, the same thread runs through the tapestry. Health is wholeness. To be well is not just to be free from pain, but to exist in balance with yourself, with your community, with the world around you, and with the gods who watch from above or lurk in the shadows. Whether you're talking about the Ayurvedic doshas in India or spiritual possession in African healing, ancient societies saw humans as fundamentally connected to everything around them. Nature, when disturbed, always pushed back. So, When an ancient healer laid a hand on your fevered brow, they weren't just checking for a pulse. They were listening for disharmony, searching for the crack in the cosmic order. Healing meant more than mending flesh. It required restoring the invisible threads that tied you to earth and sky, to ancestors and deities, to the past and the future. Now, let's turn to Egypt, where the boundary between science and sorcery blurred into a single shimmering line. In the land of the pharaohs, medicine was a sacred calling. Egyptian healers weren't just doctors, they were priests, intermediaries between the suffering body and the inscrutable gods. Their knowledge was astonishingly advanced, yet every cure was wrapped in ritual. The body could bruise and break, but the spirit, the gods, and even the afterlife played a role in every diagnosis. Much of what we know comes from ancient medical scrolls, like the Ebers Papyrus, dating back to around 1550 ECE. This battered roll of papyrus lists hundreds of remedies for toothaches, tumors, stomach pains, you name it. Egyptian doctors performed surgeries, set broken bones, treated infections, even drained abscesses with copper knives, sterilized in flame. Centuries before anyone knew about bacteria. They checked pulses, studied urine and feces for clues, and prescribed a dizzying array of herbs, some of which are still in use. But nothing started without first calling on the gods. Thoth, the ibis-headed deity, was said to have gifted medicine to humanity. Sekhmet, the lioness goddess, could both unleash plagues and grant recovery. Every treatment mingled incantation and ointment, every wound bandaged with honey and hope. Honey, by the way, was their miracle cure. Smeared over wounds, it kept infection at bay long before anyone understood microbes. Garlic and onions were doled out for heart complaints. Castor oil kept the bowels moving. Moldy bread was pressed into wounds, a primitive antibiotic centuries ahead of its time. Egyptian healers treated everyone, from the lowliest farmer to the pharaoh himself. Their reputation spread beyond Egypt's borders. Foreign rulers sometimes summoned Egyptian doctors for difficult cases. Some healers became specialists, stomach doctors, eye doctors, even exorcists for spiritual ailments. But through it all, there was never a hard line between the physical and the sacred. A fever might come from the Nile's mosquitoes, or from an angry ghost. Curing the body meant appeasing the gods, purifying the soul, and restoring the balance that kept the cosmos spinning. To the ancient Egyptian, a healer's true purpose was not just to patch up wounds or soothe a cough. It was to restore Ma'at, cosmic order. Because to them, illness was never just about the body. It was a crack in the foundation of the world itself. And so, from the muddy battlefields of Britannia to the incense-filled temples of Egypt, the story is always about more than survival. It's about the endless struggle to find meaning in suffering, to restore balance when the world goes off its axis, and to transform pain into legend. But hold on to that vision of balance, because we're about to dive into some of the world's oldest healing systems, where the body, mind, and universe are all stitched together in ways that might just surprise you. Long before modern medicine emerged, India was already writing its own story of healing. Let's rewind to a time when medicine didn't smell like antiseptic wipes, but more like turmeric, singed mugwort, or the faintly metallic tang of blood on bronze. Picture yourself in ancient India, just as the first light slips into the village, and the air hums with the promise of something cosmic. Here, medicine isn't just a job, it's a philosophy, a full-bodied way of being, something that links your aching stomach to the moon, and your moods to the turning of the seasons. This is Ayurveda, not just a science, but the science of life itself. Imagine you're sitting cross-legged on a reed mat, listening as a healer, draped in simple linen, explains that your body is made up of 3 doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Sounds like a mystical personality quiz, but with much higher stakes. Each dosha, the healer tells you, is a swirling cocktail of elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Vata is the mover, Pitta the transformer, and Kapha the builder, all jostling for dominance inside you, like rival apps on an overloaded phone. Your unique mix, set at birth, is your personal cosmic fingerprint. Get out of sync, eat poorly, sleep badly, let stress gnaw at you, and the doshas revolt. That's when illness creeps in, not as punishment, but as a cosmic misalignment. The ancient texts, names like Charaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita, read like encyclopedias for the soul. They're over 2 millennia old, but inside you'll find more than just lists of leaves and roots. Charaka, the sage of internal medicine, obsesses over prevention, urging you to treat your body like a temple before crisis arrives. Sushruta, meanwhile, is the rock star of ancient surgery. Picture him hunched over a patient, wielding a set of over 120 surgical tools, some forged in metal, some carved from wood, all frighteningly precise. If you lost your nose, perhaps as punishment for a crime, Sushruta could actually reconstruct it using a flap of skin from your cheek or your forehead. No, this wasn't for vanity posts. It was about restoring dignity in a world where mutilation was a real threat. Rhinoplasty, centuries ahead of its time, performed by firelight and sheer nerve. You're starting to sweat just imagining the scene. But Ayurveda was never only about slicing and dicing. Its true genius lies in its holistic vision. The healer doesn't just hand you a bundle of herbs and send you away. Instead, you're prescribed a symphony of therapies, yoga poses to stretch your body and mind, breathing techniques, pranayama to stoke your inner fire, rhythmic oil massages that leave you glistening like a festival idol, and fasting rituals meant to realign your digestive universe. Turmeric, ashwagandha, neem, tulsi. These aren't just spices and shrubs, they're your pharmacy and your shield. Maybe you come in with a fever. The healer won't just check your pulse. They'll ask if you quarreled with your family, if you dream restless dreams, if you're mourning a lost love. They believe every part of you, body, mind, spirit, and even the weather outside, must be brought into harmony. In this world, you're not separate from nature. You are nature. Illness is just a gentle nudge from the universe, urging you to return to balance. Now, let's hop across the mountains and deserts to ancient China, where medicine is an art of listening to things you can't see. Here, you sit with a physician whose tools are not stethoscopes and scalpels, but the pulse beneath your skin and the shade of your tongue. They want to know about your dreams, your bowel habits, the emotions swirling in your heart. Why? Because health is all about Qi, the invisible life force that surges through every fiber of your being. Qi isn't something you can measure, but you can feel it. If your Qi is blocked or out of whack, that's when sickness sweeps in. Chinese medicine is built on the dance of yin and yang, opposites that are really partners in disguise. Yin is cool, dark, and quiet, like midnight in a bamboo grove. Yang is hot, bright, and bustling, like noon in a crowded market. Every organ, emotion, and ache is mapped onto this great cosmic spectrum. Your lungs might be too yin, your liver too yang. And if these energies fall out of step, it's time for intervention. The 5 elements, wood, fire, earth, metal, water, add another layer to this cosmic Sudoku. Each element governs different organs and moods, and keeping them balanced is less like adjusting a thermostat and more like conducting an orchestra. The physician leans in, closes their eyes, and gently grasps your wrist. Pulse diagnosis is an art form here, not a science. They listen for the rhythm of your life, force, subtle changes that hint at excess or deficiency. They peer at your tongue, searching for clues in color, texture, and coating. Diagnosis is storytelling. a way of weaving together your symptoms, your environment, even your emotional weather. And then, treatment begins. Picture yourself lying on a mat, tiny needles slipping painlessly into your skin at points mapped out like the stars. This is acupuncture, meant to free the flow of qi and restore the ancient pathways called meridians. Maybe the healer lights a bundle of mugwort and hovers it near your skin. This is moxibustion, designed to warm and invigorate your energies. Or perhaps you feel the sudden tug of glass cups, drawing blood and toxins to the surface in the ritual of cupping. Herbal concoctions bubble away in the background, each recipe a carefully guarded secret. There are exercises called qigong, strict food prescriptions, and meditations to soothe your spirit. All of this is rooted in texts like the Huangdi Naijing, the Yellow Emperor's inner canon, compiled around 2,000 years ago. These ancient scrolls do more than name diseases. They probe their causes, encourage prevention, and remind you that your emotions can disrupt your organs as surely as a physical injury. Anger might scorch your liver, grief can sap your lungs, and the solution is always to restore harmony inside and out. In this world, the healer's job is to listen for the whispers of qi in every heartbeat, every sigh, every sleepless night. Now, let's drop you into the marble corridors of ancient Greece, where medicine is finally breaking up with the gods and flirting with reason. Imagine the air thick with incense and debate, the temple walls echoing with questions that sound suspiciously modern. What really causes disease? How do you know when a patient is truly healed? Here, the body is seen as an ecosystem, not a battlefield, and its health depends on keeping everything in balance. This is where the four humors take center stage, an idea that will haunt medicine for over a millennium. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, and his Roman fanboy Galen both argue that your body is governed by four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each one lines up with an element: air, water, fire, and earth, and a temperament. Are you quick to anger? That's too much yellow bile, a surplus of fire, dragging yourself through the day like a soggy tunic. You're drowning in phlegm thanks to an excess of water. The solution? Drain the excess. Bring out the leeches, the herbal purges, the strict diets, and the baths. But don't roll your eyes just yet. These weren't mindless rituals. The Greeks and Romans took observation seriously. Hippocrates, whose oath you've probably heard quoted in every cheesy hospital drama, urges his students to do no harm, to examine every patient with care, and to treat the whole person, not just the disease. He wants you to consider the seasons, the way the wind blows, the water you drink, even your mood swings. Medicine is both art and science, both ritual and reason. Healing sanctuaries called Asclepiae dot the Greek countryside, named for Asclepius, the god of medicine. Step inside, and you'll find more than a hospital. These are spiritual retreats, where the sick come to sleep in sacred dormitories and hope for healing dreams. Baths, diets, exercise, and prayer are all part of the package. If you're lucky, you wake up having dreamed of a cure, ready to plunge into ritual purification and the restorative embrace of the sun. Here, science and spirituality walk hand in hand, and the line between physician and priest blurs. When Rome swallows Greece, medicine migrates and mutates. Galen, a Greek by birth, but a Roman by ambition, becomes the medical influencer of his age. He patches up gladiators, dissects animals to understand anatomy, and fills scroll after scroll with medical wisdom. Some of his ideas are genius, others not so much. But his reach is enormous. For centuries, his writings are gospel, shaping how the West thinks about health, disease, and the body's mysterious machinery. Greco-Roman medicine, for all its mystical beginnings, inches toward a new idea that the body is an intricate system, not just a vessel for the gods' whims. If you can just understand it, study it, observe it, maybe even slice it open, you can bring it back into harmony. Not with faith alone, but with careful practice, relentless questioning, and a willingness to get your hands dirty. Now, before you pat yourself on the back for surviving 3 wildly different medical systems, let's pull the camera back even further. Long before anyone wrote down a single word about humas, doshas, or chi, healing was already happening everywhere, whispered from parent to child, elder to apprentice, across every continent. Imagine yourself in a ring of smoke, the low thrum of a drum echoing through the night. As a healer, maybe called a shaman, maybe a medicine woman, prepares medicines not from textbooks, but from memory and intuition. In indigenous cultures the world over, medicine is not a career, it's a calling. It's woven into every ritual, every meal, every story. You'll see this among Native American tribes, where medicine men and women are guides, counselors, and keepers of sacred knowledge. If you're ill, it's not just your body that's out of tune. It's your relationship with nature, with your family, with your own spirit. Healing means reconnection. It means gathering sage, cedar, sweetgrass, and tobacco, using them in smudging rituals to purify the body and spirit. Each plant is both ingredient and ancestor, both cure and symbol. Healers lead sweat lodges, vision quests, and ceremonies that seek not to fight disease, but to restore harmony between body, land, ancestors, and the invisible threads of the world. Sometimes illness is blamed on a breach of taboo, or a piece of your soul lost to trauma. The answer might be a soul retrieval, a ritual with chanting, drumming, and the slow weaving back of what was lost. Travel to the Amazon, and you'll find shamans brewing powerful plant medicines, meant to open the mind and reveal the roots of suffering. These are not Friday night party tricks, but deep, sacred journeys into the self. In Aboriginal Australia, bush medicine draws on herbs, clays, and the stories passed down from the Dreamtime, that ancient era when the world was sung into being. Healing here is about balance between your body, the land, your ancestors, and even the song lines that crisscross the earth. None of this is written in books. It lives in the songs, dances, and landscapes, in the way knowledge is handed down, not hoarded. Modern medicine may claim the lab and the microscope, but for millennia, the earth was the original pharmacy, and healing was about remembering who you are, not just what hurts. So, as you dust yourself off from this whirlwind tour of ancient healing, you might be tempted to romanticize it all, to imagine a world of wise sages, gentle rituals, and cosmic harmony. But don't forget, all of this unfolded in the shadow of real danger, real pain, and real need. Healing was always an act of courage, creativity, and sometimes desperation. Whether you are a patient on a reed mat, a client in a smoky lodge, or a hopeful sleeper in a marble sanctuary, you are always reaching for balance, for meaning, and for a little relief from the chaos of the world. And as the story moves forward, remember, the line between ritual and surgery, between healing and art, is never straight. Because across every ancient civilization, regardless of language, geography, or belief system, there was one constant. Step into the ancient world and forget, for a moment, your modern medicine cabinets, your telehealth appointments, and your faith in sterile white lab coats. Whether you're wandering the dusty lanes of Babylon, drifting down the Nile, or squinting at the sun-bleached stones of Athens, one truth remains. Healing wasn't just a matter of treating the flesh. It was a matter of tending the soul. The body might ache, fever, or bleed, but to the ancients, illness meant something deeper had gone awry. Maybe the gods were displeased. Maybe your spirit had slipped out of harmony. Or maybe, just maybe, you'd crossed some invisible line in the cosmic order and needed to find your way back. And the bridge between suffering and salvation ritual. Always ritual. Imagine yourself in the bustling streets of Mesopotamia, mud brick houses lining the Tigris, the air thick with incense and the scent of baking bread. Here, before medicine had manuals or degrees, people turned to the men and women who could see beyond the veil, the exorcists, the priests, the keepers of sacred words. Your neighbor's child is burning with fever. You don't reach for Tylenol. Instead, you whisper a prayer and shape a little clay figurine, burying it beneath the threshold to ward off sickness. Chants echo as ointments are pressed onto the skin. The ritual isn't the sideshow, it is the main event. It is medicine. Wander south to Egypt, where the Nile's flood brings both life and disease. Here, healers never lift a finger without first invoking Thoth, the god of wisdom, or Sekhmet, the fierce lioness of healing and wrath. Got a wound? Before the honey is dabbed or the linen bandage wrapped, a prayer flows from the healer's lips, an ancient melody meant to realign your suffering with the universal order, a principle called Ma'at. In Egypt, illness wasn't just a cut or a cough. It was a cosmic imbalance, a crack in the fabric of truth and harmony. The cure was as much about restoring order as it was about cleaning a wound. Now let's turn up the rhythm. In countless African cultures, healing didn't happen in silence. The air vibrates with the beat of drums and the shuffle of feet. The Sangoma, the Nganga, call them what you will, are more than herbalists. They are mediators between the living and the ancestors, the interpreters of dreams. Diagnosis might come through a handful of thrown bones or a trance brought on by song and dance. Herbs matter, yes. But first you must consult the unseen world. What message is your pain trying to deliver? What spirit is knocking at your door? And then Greece. Ah, the land of philosophers and poets, but also of sacred healing temples. Picture yourself arriving at an Asclepion, desperate for relief, your body battered by some mysterious affliction. Before seeing the priest-physician, you go through a ritual cleansing, maybe a fast, maybe a prayer. At night, you lie down in the abaton, the holy dormitory, and sleep beneath the gaze of Asclepios, the god of medicine. In your dreams, the god, or perhaps a snake, his sacred animal, visits you. Priests gather at dawn, eager to interpret your visions and prescribe a path to health. Here, ritual isn't some outdated superstition. It's a tool, a scaffold for the chaos of suffering, a way to transform fear into hope, isolation into belonging. You might scoff, clutching your evidence-based medicine and your clinical trials, muttering about the placebo effect. But let's be honest, modern science is only now catching up to what the ancients took for granted. Sometimes, a word spoken with reverence can cut deeper than a scalpel. Sometimes, the act of being seen, touched, and honored is the real medicine. Not every wound is visible, and not every cure comes in a bottle. Now, before you start congratulating yourself on escaping the world of leeches and incantations, let's talk about surgery. Cue the Hollywood flashbacks, trembling hands, rusty sores, screams echoing down torchlit halls. But reality, far more impressive and a lot more human. Across continents, ancient surgeons performed their work with a skill and precision that would make you rethink the word primitive. Let's begin in India, over 2,000 years ago. Here, Sushruta, considered the father of surgery, compiled the text known as the Sushruta Samhita, a medical encyclopedia listing over 300 surgical procedures. Tumor removal? Check. Setting broken bones? Absolutely. Reconstructing noses in a kind of proto-plastic surgery? You bet. The toolkit wasn't made of plastic or stainless steel, but iron and stone, sharp and meticulously crafted. Sushruta even insisted on cleanliness, preparation, and anatomical study, though human dissection was mostly forbidden. So animals stood in for the real thing. His wisdom didn't just stay in India, it traveled the world, shaping medical traditions from the Middle East to Europe centuries later. Egypt, too, added surgical sorcerers. Papyrus scrolls reveal detailed instructions for stitching wounds, setting limbs, and draining abscesses. The tools, bronze knives, bone saws, cauterizing rods, might look menacing displayed in a museum, but in skilled hands, they meant survival. Egyptian healers even drilled into skulls to relieve pressure from head injuries, a procedure called trepanation. Sounds horrific, right? But archaeologists have found skulls with clear signs of healing, proof that these patients didn't just survive, they lived on. And it wasn't just Egypt. Journey to pre-Columbian Peru, and you'll find warriors with holes bored into their skulls, a testament to centuries-old neurosurgery. In some regions, the survival rate for these operations exceeded 80%, based on bone regrowth. The secret? Maybe it was coca leaves for pain, or maize beer to dull the senses, plus whatever herbal concoctions could fight off infection. Not exactly a spa day, but a lot more effective than you'd expect. Fast forward to the Greco-Roman world. Here, Galen, the celebrity doctor of his era, honed his craft by patching up wounded gladiators and dissecting animals. His insights into nerves and blood vessels became the bedrock of Western anatomy for centuries. Roman surgeons, especially those on military campaigns, had to work fast and smart. They used clamps and ligatures to stem bleeding, turning battlefield chaos into a kind of grim ballet. Surgery was high risk, but it was also revered. These weren't butchers. They were artists, wielding metal with as much grace as a poet wields a pen. And though their understanding was incomplete, every modern scalpel owes them a debt. Here's the twist. We like to think we've outgrown all this, that our world of digital scans and precision lasers is a clean break from the past. But listen closely, and you'll still hear the old songs. Ayurvedic remedies are now staples in yoga studios. Chinese herbal teas line pharmacy shelves. Hospitals invite shamans and elders to bless patients, honoring traditions that go back millennia. Medical students still pledge to do no harm, just as Hippocrates demanded. And in the operating room, many of the tools in use today trace a direct lineage to Sushruta's iron instruments. Even our most cutting-edge theories, holistic care, preventative medicine, the mind-body connection, are echoes of ancient wisdom. The idea that healing isn't just about fixing a broken part, but restoring harmony to the whole person, that's as old as civilization itself. Modern science is finally confirming what the ancients always knew. Stress, isolation, and emotional pain can sabotage your immune system, mess with your sleep, and show up as physical symptoms. Meditation, once a spiritual pursuit, is now a medical recommendation. Forest bathing, inspired by Shinto and indigenous practices, is prescribed for anxiety. And the placebo effect, the power of belief, keeps baffling researchers who wish it would just go away. It's tempting to dismiss ancient medicine as a patchwork of superstition and lucky guesses. But look closer. What you'll find is a worldview that saw illness, not as a mechanical failure, but as a signal, an alarm bell telling you something is out of balance. Healing was about more than a cure. It was about comfort, about finding meaning in suffering, about being witnessed and understood. The ancients, for all their limitations, understood that healing was sacred. Whether they chanted prayers, set bones, or brewed herbal teas, they treated the act of healing as something that connected you to the divine, to your community, and to yourself. So as we barrel ahead into a future of gene editing, AI diagnostics, and therapies that sound like science fiction, maybe we're not leaving the past behind. Maybe we're finally catching up. were returning armed with new tools, but carrying the same old longing. A longing for balance, for wholeness, for a kind of healing that goes beyond molecules and scans, reaching into the tangled realm of spirit and story. And speaking of stories that refuse to die, let's drift across the Aegean Sea to an island that became the cradle of one of history's most enigmatic voices. Her name floats through the centuries like a secret song, Sappho. Born around 630 in the years before what you'd call the Common Era, Sappho was a poet whose words could set a heart on fire under the stars of Lesbos. Unlike the kings and conquerors carved into stone, Sappho's legacy was built on something far more fragile and yet infinitely more enduring: emotion. She wasn't a warrior or a lawmaker. Her battlefield was the human soul. She wrote of longing and jealousy, of beauty that stings, of joy and despair that flicker like candlelight. Where the epic poet sang of gods and heroes, Sappho captured what everyone else ignored: the glance, the blush, the tremble of a hand. She pressed these moments into verse, like wildflowers into a book, delicate and timeless. We barely know her biography. There are no statues, no diaries, no tidy list of dates. Just fragments, a handful of lines quoted by scholars, scraps of papyrus unearthed by chance, echoes of her voice drifting across the ages. Yet those fragments dazzle. Plato, yes, that Plato, called her the 10th Muse. For centuries, poets and dreamers have hunted her legacy, piecing together her life one torn scroll at a time. Sappho was likely born to a noble family on Lesbos, an island where music and poetry were as common as olives and salt. She may have had siblings, a daughter, even political enemies, though the details are as murky as an Aegean dawn. What we know is that she lived through exile and upheaval, through silences and songs. In an era when most women's voices were confined to the home or erased altogether, Sappho shattered expectations, not with rebellion, but with beauty. She wrote in the Aeolic dialect, short, vivid lyrics meant to be sung to the lyre. Her poetry was intimate, drenched in imagery. "Evening star," she writes, "you bring back all that the shining day has scattered. Words like these outlast entire empires." And then, almost without warning, she disappears from the record. Most of her work lost to fire, neglect, or censors. But what's left is a testament. She didn't need marble monuments. Her verses are her monument. When we talk about passion in poetry, about love sung without shame, about longing that can't be silenced by centuries, we're still speaking Sappho's name. But to understand Sappho, you first have to understand Lesbos, the island that nurtured her voice. Forget the stereotype of a sleepy backwater. In ancient Greece, Lesbos was a thriving center of art, debate, and philosophy. Its valleys brimmed with olives. The winds carried the scent of sea and wildflowers. It wasn't Athens, and it didn't want to be. Lesbos moved to its own rhythm, sensual and slow, steeped in lyric tradition. Here, music wasn't background noise. It was a way of life. Liz and Aloy rang out in homes and temples. Poetry was sung, not read. In this world of music and nature, Sappho's voice took root. She lived in Mytilene, the island's busy capital, a city alive with politics, rivalries, and artistic ambition. Sappho herself was exiled, perhaps to Sicily, during one of the island's many political storms. But Lesbos always called her back. It was her muse, her anchor, her endless inspiration. Lesbos was also unique in another way. It carved out space for female community that was almost unheard of in the ancient world. Aristocratic girls were educated in music, poetry, and religious ritual. Some scholars believe Sappho led a thiasos, a circle of young women devoted to poetry, dance, and worship of Aphrodite. This wasn't a classroom in the modern sense, but a creative sisterhood. a sanctuary for art and affection. Here, bonds were formed, emotional, intellectual, and, perhaps, romantic. Sappho wrote directly to these women, not as distant muses, but as living, breathing presences. She called them by name, mourned their departures, celebrated their beauty, and confessed her love with a rawness that still stings. I have not had one word from her. I beg you, bring her back to me. That's not myth. That's not theatre. That's a real voice, echoing through a circle of women gathered by lamplight, turning feeling into song. Time, as always, would twist her memory, turning admiration into scandal or speculation. But Lesbos was the soil that grew her truth, not just an island, but a cradle of passion, artistry, and fearless expression. Sappho didn't merely live on Lesbos. She became the island's spirit, its song, its whispered longing. As we leave the sun-washed hills of Lesbos behind, keep Sappho's voice in your ear. Because next, we'll explore the artistry and radical honesty of her poetry. How, in an age obsessed with gods and heroes, she dared to write about the secret chambers of the heart. Step into the clamor of ancient Greece for a moment. Picture yourself surrounded by the steady hammer of bronze on shield, the endless drone of heroic tales recited in smoky halls, and everywhere, men boasting of conquest, glory, and petty rivalries. This is the world that gave us the immortal lines of Homer, where poetry was measured by how many ships you could launch or monsters you could slay. But then, in a sudden hush between all that noise, you catch a different kind of song, a softer, sharper melody that doesn't echo across battlefields, but ripples quietly through candlelit rooms and sun-drenched courtyards. This is Sappho. She didn't bother with warriors or gods. Sappho wrote the trembling of your hands when you reach for someone, the blush that crawls up your neck when a glance lingers too long, the wild heartbeat you can't control. She was one of the first in all Western history to speak as an I. Not just a narrator hovering above the scene, but a woman confessing the raw immediacy of her own desires. And what poured from her was everything most people tried to hide: longing, jealousy, tenderness, and that dizzy ache called love. But here's the twist. The most radical thing wasn't just that she wrote about these feelings. It was that she wrote them as a woman, for women to women. She didn't hide behind allegory or distant myth. She named names. She remembered smiles, voices, the scent of perfumed hair braided with care. In a society where women's voices were meant to be quiet, tucked away behind closed doors, Sappho spun a universe where emotion was not a weakness to be endured, but a force to be celebrated. Imagine trying to pull this off back then. Public life was the ultimate men's club. Literature, politics, philosophy, those belonged to the bearded philosophers and swaggering generals. Sappho, though, didn't kick open the door with a manifesto. She slipped through with rhythm, with lyric. Her poems didn't ask for permission. They flowed through the cracks, turning private longing into public art. Within the world she created, she did something that would shock even some modern sensibilities. She wrote honestly, without disguise, about the women she loved. No metaphor cloaks, no shyness about the truth. She remembered their laughter echoing in the courtyards, the warmth of their voices, the way they braided their hair in the afternoon light. You can almost smell jasmine tangled in those braids if you close your eyes. Let's look at one of her most famous fragments. Sappho writes of watching the woman she adores speak with another man. She calls him equal to the gods, not out of flattery, but because of the agony he causes her. He gets to sit beside her, hear her sweet voice, watch her laughter, while Sappho sits apart, heart hammering, breath stolen by jealousy. There's nothing melodramatic or performative here. This is the gut punch of unrequited love, rendered with a clarity that still stings across centuries. She doesn't bluster or beg. She aches, quietly, with a humanity so real you can almost hear her heart pounding beside your own. Her poetry is electric with eros, sensual, yes, but never crude. She describes the curve of a neck, the hush of sleep, the shimmer of moonlight on skin. For Sappho, beauty and intimacy were inseparable, two notes in the same song. She painted desire with the care of an artist, every detail precise, every emotion unfiltered. And because of that, later generations didn't know what to do with her. Some tried to erase her queerness, scrubbing away the love between women. Others twisted her story into a cautionary myth, a tragic figure destroyed by her own passion. But none of that changes the core truth. Pulsing through her verses, here was someone who loved bravely, wrote honestly, and refused to apologize for either. Sappho didn't just pen poems, she composed music for the soul. Back then, poetry wasn't something you read in silence, hunched over a scroll. It was sound and breath, meant to be performed. Her specialty was the lyric, short and intensely personal, sung to the gentle strum of the lyre. Envision her, knees tucked beneath her, instrument cradled in her lap, fingers plucking out melodies as her voice drifts through the evening air. This is where we get the word lyrical, the poetry of feeling, not conquest. No endless lists of ships or slain monsters, just the pulse of the heart, the catch of breath, the confession whispered in the dark. She wrote in Aeolic Greek, a dialect soft and fluid, full of music. Her chosen form, now called the Sapphic stanza, moves with a hypnotic rhythm, 3 long rolling lines, followed by a shorter, almost gasped finale. It's like a sigh at the end of a longing thought, or the hush that follows after laughter fades. You can almost feel the rise and fall of breath, the quiet between words. Her performances weren't grand public spectacles. They happened in circles of women, maybe students, companions, priestesses. These were spaces where the boundaries between song, ritual, education and desire blurred. This wasn't just poetry, it was culture, passed from hand to hand, heart to heart. Try to imagine the sound. The soft twang of strings, the rise and fall of Sappho's voice, the attentive quiet of her listeners. Her poems often opened with a question or a plea. Come to me now, golden Aphrodite, and lift me from this hard care. Each piece was half prayer, half conversation, reaching for the divine while rooted in the ordinary ache of wanting. And despite the centuries that separate us, there's something shockingly modern about her work. You could set her lines to music today, and the effect would be just as electrifying, just as raw. Sappho turned confession into melody, and in doing so, she taught the world that every thrill of touch, every pang of longing, deserves its own song. Her words remind us that emotion is not just a private burden to hide, but a celebration to be sung. And though centuries tried to bury her, her voice still vibrates through time, echoing in every heart that has ever loved without apology. But for all her artistry, for all her radical honesty, we are left with only fragments, shards of a much larger mosaic. And as we move forward, it's time to ask what happens to the voices that history tried to silence. For every line of Sappho's poetry we have today, dozens, perhaps hundreds, are lost. Imagine this. What we have in our hands today are not whole songs, but the scattered remnants of something that once blazed like a bonfire. Each surviving line is a cinder, still warm with longing. Some fragments arrive almost intact, a complete stanza that manages to hold together through time's storms. Others, just a breath, a single word, a sigh, the tail end of a thought that never got to finish. And yet, even these tatters of poetry throb with life, glowing softly in the ashes of what was lost. So what happened? Why is Sappho's voice, once so full and ringing, now mostly an echo? Well, cue the parade of time's greatest hits, war, neglect, and the sort of deliberate destruction that humans seem to excel at. Sappho's work wasn't some secret past between friends. In her day, her poems were collected into 9 volumes, proudly shelved in the legendary Library of Alexandria. Imagine them, rows of papyrus, carefully copied and sung throughout the Greek world, echoing in banquet halls and private gardens alike. But then the library burned, and with its flames went a huge slice of ancient knowledge. Later, as the tides of Christian influence rose, anything deemed too pagan or, heaven forbid, too passionate was marked for suppression or outright incineration. Sappho's poetry, dripping with desire, and especially her fearless celebration of love between women, became a prime target. By the time the medieval world rolled around, Sappho was less a presence than a rumor. Her name survived, but her voice was almost erased. How did anything make it through? Only because other writers, grammar pedants, philosophers and commentators quoted her in passing, usually to show off her clever turns of phrase or to illustrate a tricky bit of grammar. They weren't trying to save her soul, just her syntax. But even when cited for technical reasons, Sappho's emotional force managed to slip through the cracks. Then, in a twist worthy of a Netflix reboot, the sands of Egypt began giving up their secrets. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, archaeologists sifting through the rubbish heaps of Oxyrhynchus unearthed thousands of papyrus scraps. Among them, torn, faded lines of Sappho, words no human had read in 1,000 years. Suddenly, the fragments multiplied. And then, just when you thought the story couldn't get any stranger, in 2004, a nearly complete poem of hers surfaced. Its papyrus had been used to wrap a mummy, of all things, and ended up in a German collection. Every new find felt like a small resurrection, a voice calling up from beneath the rubble. And yet, the gaps remain. We read Sappho through a glass darkly, through echoes, through holes in the tapestry. What do we crave about her? It's not just the words that are lost, but the possibility of what she might have said, had history left her uninterrupted. There's a certain haunting beauty in this survival by fragmentation. After all, Sappho herself wrote about the fleeting, about beauty dissolving like morning dew, about moments slipping through our grasp. Maybe it's fitting that her poetry reaches us, not as a grand edifice, but as a puzzle. Pieces gathered by those who love language and ache for connection. Her voice, once smothered by flames and silence, still burns, refusing to go out. Of course, Sappho's honesty was always going to draw attention, and not always the good kind. In her lifetime, she was revered, celebrated as the master of lyric poetry. Even Plato, who wasn't exactly prone to doling out compliments, called her the 10th muse, placing her among the immortals. But time has a way of twisting legacies, especially when power changes hands. As centuries rolled by and new moral codes took hold, Sappho's work was either sanitized, vilified, or quietly erased. Why? Because she wrote about love, the sort that history didn't want to remember. Her poems are brimming with affection and longing for women, sometimes playful, sometimes jealous, always unflinchingly honest. She praised beauty, mourned absence, confessed desire, and celebrated intimacy, all without veiling her truth. On her home island of Lesbos, especially among the aristocratic women of her social circle, these bonds were nothing odd. Close female friendships, even romantic ones, were not only accepted, but sometimes revered. But as Roman, Christian, and later Victorian values swept in, her truth became a problem. Rather than face it, later generations simply rewrote her. Medieval scribes ignored her. Renaissance translators tiptoed around her language. The Victorians, never ones to let a juicy story go untamed, stamped her with a tragic badge. She must have leapt to her death from a cliff, undone by her unrequited love for a handsome ferryman named Phaon. And just so you know, there isn't a shred of evidence for this in her authentic work. The cliff-jumping tale was never about Sappho. It was about making her heartbreak safer, making her desire more palatable, and recasting a woman who loved women as a victim of a man's indifference. Some critics reduced her poetry to mere school lessons. Others called her indecent and tried to erase her entirely. And yet, she survived. Even in scandal, Sappho's name lingered. In the 19th century, when speaking openly about same-sex love was still a social death sentence, her legacy quietly became a code for those searching for community. The words sapphic and lesbian, both rooted in her name and her island, became global shorthand for a kind of love that history tried desperately to bury. Without ever meaning to, Sappho became a beacon, a poetic ancestor for anyone whose love was forced into the shadows. Even now, the debates rumble on. Who was Sappho? Was she a teacher, a lover, a philosopher, a myth, a threat? But maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe it's not about who she was, but why her truth still unsettles us. Sappho never wrote to fit a mold. She wrote what she felt, called out beauty where she saw it, confessed longing without shame, and made her life into poetry. Her so-called scandal wasn't in her actions, but in her relentless honesty. She dared to write desire, and for that history tried to hush her. It never managed. If there was a single divine presence hovering over Sappho's life, it was Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, and all the tangled mess of desire. To Sappho, Aphrodite wasn't just a distant myth. She was a confidant, a muse, sometimes even a co-conspirator in moments of passion or heartbreak. Some of Sappho's most powerful poetry isn't just about love. It's a prayer, an argument, a plea to the goddess herself. When longing became too much, Sappho wrote directly to Aphrodite. Think of her most famous surviving poem, the Ode to Aphrodite. Sappho isn't just groveling at the goddess's feet. She's addressing her like an old friend, someone who's been through this heartbreak before. Come to me now, she writes. If you've ever answered me before, free me from hard care. Grant me what my heart wants. There's no shame in this vulnerability, no apology for desire. Sappho's love isn't sinful or weak. It's sacred, a force strong enough to summon a goddess from the heavens. Back in the ancient world, Aphrodite's domain wasn't just romance. She was the queen of attraction, seduction, the spark between bodies, the ache of longing. To invoke her was to admit that love could be both agony and ecstasy. Sappho captured that perfectly. She didn't paint love as gentle, she wrote it as a storm. In one poem she says, "Love shook my soul like the wind on the mountain, shaking the oaks." Love, for Sappho, was a force of nature, violent, unpredictable, impossible to resist. By centering Aphrodite in her poetry, Sappho turned longing into something mythic. Her personal feelings blurred into the divine. The everyday heartbreak of missing someone became a cosmic event, as worthy of song as any hero's quest. She built a legacy where love wasn't just a theme, it was a form of worship. Aphrodite in Sappho's verse is never just a statue or a story. She's a mirror, reflecting all the confusion, intensity, and beauty of being human. And in every line, you can almost hear the goddess listen, and sometimes answer back. Now, about Sappho's death. If you're hoping for neat closure, prepare for disappointment. Her end is as wrapped in mystery as her life. No one knows for sure when she died, how old she was, or where she spent her final years. Some say she died peacefully on Lesbos, with the sea and the songs of her youth keeping her company. Others, usually Roman poets with a taste for melodrama, spun out the cliff-leaping fantasy, a body dashed on the rocks below, all for the love of a man who never loved her back. But history offers no evidence for this. It's a story invented, probably by men, to recast the most powerful female poetic voice as a casualty of heterosexual heartbreak. It's tidy, sure, but it's also a lie. The real truth is quieter. Sappho's exit from history was as unassuming as her arrival. After her death, her poetry lived on. For centuries she was studied by philosophers, quoted by playwrights, sung by performers across Greece. Her verses, once preserved in 9 books, were as sought after as Homer's. But history doesn't favor voices that challenge its norms. As the Roman Empire rose and then Christian morality took over, Sappho's works, especially those celebrating female love, fell out of favor. Her poems stopped being recopied. Her books faded, left to the mercy of time in libraries that would later burn or crumble. Some say her works were deliberately destroyed by church officials, who found her songs too dangerous. By the Middle Ages, Sappho's name survived, but her words were gone. It took 1,000 years for her voice to re-emerge, rescued from trash heaps in Egypt, or quoted in the margins of ancient textbooks. Piece by piece, she came back, not as a myth, but as a survivor. Her death is lost to history, but her disappearance was never total. Sappho lingered in whispers, in lines scribbled by long-dead scholars, in the stubborn ache of a voice that refused to vanish. She didn't need a heroic end. Her poetry had already made her immortal. Even in the empty spaces where her words once lived, you can sense her spirit yearning, unfinished, but never gone. Her life may be hidden in shadow, her verses scattered and incomplete, but Sappho's influence has never faded. If anything, it's become stronger, a candle guttering but never extinguished. In every era, someone has found her again. During the Renaissance, scholars pored over her fragments, marveling at her ability to express emotion with such delicate force. In the Romantic era, poets like Byron and Shelley invoked her name as a touchstone. In the 19th and 20th centuries, as conversations around gender and identity began to stir, Sappho became a symbol of queer resilience, feminine artistry, and emotional freedom. Her name lives on in our very language. Sapphic, now used to describe love between women. Lesbian, taken from the name of her island, has become a global identity. These aren't just words. They are proof that a voice can ripple through millennia and still change how we see love, desire, and expression. Artists, writers, and musicians continue to be drawn back to her. Painters have imagined her, strumming her lyre under the moon. Poets have translated her again and again, each one searching for the pulse beneath the fragments. Modern authors have reclaimed her, reimagined her, resurrected her in novels, songs, and plays. And through it all, one thing remains true. Sappho speaks to something universal. It doesn't matter that her poems are broken, or that her biography is a blur. What matters is the emotion that beats beneath the words, the trembling thrill of desire, the ache of absence, the holiness of beauty. These are feelings we all know. Sappho simply found a way to sing them, so that they'd last. Maybe that's her real immortality. Not marble busts or endless footnotes, but the fact that a few lines, written over 2,000 years ago, can still make someone stop, breathe, and feel less alone. Sappho's gift was never just poetry. It was presence. She turned feeling into an art form. She made longing into a truth you could hold. In doing so, she became more than a poet. She became a mirror for anyone who's ever loved quietly, deeply, or defiantly. So as long as hearts beat and words are spoken, Sappho will remain. Not just remembered, but truly felt. And in that, she is forever.